Hey, it's Jared with Gear and Light. Today we're going to take a look at the top settings that I changed on my Sony a7 IV. Now the Sony a7 IV, the latest camera at the time that I'm recording this from Sony, is fantastic so far. I'm really enjoying this camera. I got it in just the day after Christmas, which was a little frustrating, but nonetheless, have the camera and have been shooting with it this past week and really enjoy it. So I want to share some of the settings that I changed on the camera. Before I dive into the 7 settings, I've got some just getting started settings that I want to make sure that you set. Now, the first is to set the date and time on the camera. I know when you get a new camera, it can be very exciting to just turn it on, go right past all the settings and not even pay attention. But setting the date and time, you can see how I'm going through the menu process here to get to the area settings, which is your time zone, your whether you can toggle daylight savings, your date and time format, and all of that stuff. You want to make sure to set that up, because when you go to import your images into something like Adobe Lightroom, or then you take your images and you upload them to Google Photos or something like that, it sorts everything by the data that's written to the file, the date and time, and all your images are going to be sorted incorrectly if you don't set this setting. So I highly recommend, whether you did it when you turned the camera on for the first time or you go back right now and do it, make sure to set the date and time. Now, the next setting is to format your SD cards internally in the camera. I don't care if they're brand new cards, format them inside the camera so that they are formatted and configured correctly for the specific camera you're shooting in. Even when I move cards between different Sony cameras, I format them in the camera that I am using the cards in. I've had issues in the past with cards becoming corrupt, and because I formatted them on a computer or something like that, and this has been a long time ago that I've had these problems. I format my cards in my camera, and I very ever rarely have any issues with files. I have on occasion had a RAW file corrupt, and I'll talk a little bit about that here in a minute, but I avoid that mostly by making sure that I format my cards in the camera. So go to the shooting menu, go down to media, across to format, and then you'll see that I have slot 1 and slot 2 available because I have SD cards in both slots. I have to go and manually format each card slot. Now, of course, if you're using cards that you've used in another camera, I highly recommend that you make sure that you get the images, video files, and stuff off of those cards before you format them, because obviously when you format your cards, you're going to lose the data. So make sure that your cards are backed up and then format them fresh in your Sony a7 IV. Now, one of the biggest distractions for me is the audio signals with the camera. When you press down the shutter button, when the camera achieves focus, you get a beep, and there are different beeps and things that happen with the camera periodically while using it. Audio signals are kind of annoying to me. When I'm out shooting, I want to be as stealthy as possible, and I also don't want to be a distraction. And so when I'm shooting, especially when I used to shoot a lot of weddings, I didn't want my camera beeping and making audio signal beeps all throughout while I'm trying to shoot an intimate setting. These are things that I do not want to have happen. And the beep really is just kind of annoying. You get visual feedback on the camera when it achieves focus, and so you really just don't need the beep. And so I go into the setup menu to sound options, down to audio signals, and set that to off. Now, that's not going to turn off volume for when you're playing back video and stuff like that, so you don't have to worry about that. It really just gets rid of those audio signals that beep and verify different things when you are using the camera. And of course, if you find that you miss those, you can always go back and turn them on. So before we get started on my top 7 settings, I want to invite you to take my Sony a7 IV Getting Started course. I also have another course that I'm working on that's a ditch auto course for this camera to help you get out of automatic mode and start shooting in manual. My ditch auto course is almost 10 years old, and it has hundreds of thousands of students, and one of the main feedback points that I've received is that people wish that the course was more geared towards the camera that they were using. At that time, I was shooting on a Canon 5D Mark III or Mark II, I can't even remember, but I think it was the Mark III, but now we're shooting on cameras that are much different, and so I'm listening to that, and in 2022 my goal is to make more camera specific content. So if you're interested in that, make sure to check out the link in the description below. So the first setting that I always go and change when I get a new camera is the image quality settings, especially on a Sony camera. And most cameras, they come default to just shooting JPEGs. While JPEGs are great, I like raw images because I like to edit and manipulate my images in Adobe Lightroom. Utilizing Camera Raw, I can make lots of great changes to those images, and I have a lot more detail and image information to work with when I'm shooting raw files. However, I also like to shoot JPEG still as a backup because, like I mentioned before, in the instance that I do have a raw file that is corrupt, I want to make sure to have a JPEG as a backup. So under the image quality setting here, which is under the shooting menu, I can go over to JPEG HEIF, and I'm shooting JPEGs. You can shoot HEIF images. It's a new file format, or a newer file format that we saw emerge on smartphones, and it is better for image compression. So you're going to get a great image with a lower file size, essentially is what it is. So it's a more effective JPEG image. The only problem is that not every computer system can utilize these HEIF images. I know as of maybe about a month ago, I tried taking HEIF images and just looking at them on a Windows PC, and I couldn't even see them. So I think that there is a little bit of time before HEIF is going to be implemented by default so that we can, just utilize this. For right now, I'm just going to use JPEG because this is only my backup file. If I go down to image quality settings, you can see that I've got some different options here for slot 1 and slot 2. That's because under the record media settings menu, I turned off slot 1 and went to sort recording. If I'm on slot 1, you can see here that under my menu, I just have this single slot here, and I want to separate these. I want raw images going to one card and JPEG images going to another card. So I'm going to go under record media settings, and under record media, I'm going to go to sort recording and then hit the menu button to go back. And then now when I jump back in, you can see I have the two columns, and I'm going to put raw images on one card and JPEG on the other card. Now the reason that I separate them is so that when I put the card in my computer to load images into Lightroom, I don't have to look at both the raw and the JPEG copy. That makes it really annoying for trying to copy just or import just the raw images into Adobe Lightroom because I have to click every other image, skipping the JPEGs. I don't want to import the JPEGs. They're only there as a backup. So under file format, I choose raw. Under raw file type, I do lossless compressed, which is kind of a middle level compression. Even compressed is still a great image. I only go into uncompressed when I know I'm going to be shooting images that I need as much detail as possible. For example, if I'm shooting close-up portraits of a person, or if I'm shooting images that are going to be used in print media or something like that, I want to make sure that I have an uncompressed. But otherwise, I stay in lossless compressed. And then, of course, the JPEG quality and image size are blank because we're not shooting any JPEGs to this card. But if I jump over to slot 2, I can make sure JPEG is set. I can set the JPEG quality, and I just set it to fine because this is a backup. It's not an image that I likely will use. And then I'll just leave the JPEG image size to the 33 megapixel size. So let's go back down to the record media settings, and we'll go to the settings for video recording. Under recording media for video, I put it under simultaneous recording. I'm going to have it record video to both cards at the same time. That way I have a backup of the video. I already have my card set to have backups of the photos with RAW going to one, JPEG going to the other, but with video recording, I want it writing to both cards so that I have a backup just in case something happens to one of those cards. Or a video file, I have a simultaneous backup. So I have that set. And then I leave auto switch media set to off. And I leave auto switch media to off because you would only use that feature if you were recording to one card and then wanted to switch to the second card when the first card was full. That's another way of setting up the camera so that you can maximize the amount of space that you have available even when you have smaller card sizes. But for me, I like redundancy over having more space, and so I utilize the setup how we've just walked through it together. Now the second setting that I adjust is my video format settings, which is under shooting menu, image quality, and file format. Now, it's going to give you a little notice here, a basic setting for movie shooting, and there are different options, different file format options here, and I utilize XAVCS 4K. Now, the reason that I utilize that one is because it gives me 30p, 60p, and 24p options. It gives me good bit rates and, of course, 10-bit capture in 422. Now, there are other options here that are higher quality and lower quality, and I utilize those depending on what I'm trying to shoot. I want good video quality, but I also want to be able to record for a while. If I go and set my camera on the most open setting that it has to capture the highest quality video, on a 128 gigabyte card, I'm not even going to get an hour's worth of recording, and that is large file sizes. Of course, if I go down to the smallest file size for 4K, I'll get more, but I won't be able to get a 30p option. I'll only get 24 or 60p. So for me, I choose this option, and then I will go down to movie settings, and under movie settings, you can see I get the frame rate option for 30p, and I get the record setting option of 140 megabits at 422 10-bit. That is the option that I choose to shoot in. Of course, there are other options, and if you're trying to achieve something different, you can choose those options. But those are the options that are going to give me the best quality video and the most record time possible. Another thing to keep in mind that with this camera, when you go into 60p, so if you're trying to shoot 60p, which I would prefer to shoot in, the camera is going to go into a 1.5 crop. And so when you're in 30p or 24p, you're going to have a certain crop. And then when you shoot into 60p, it's actually going to zoom in 1.5 times. And that is a frustration that I have with this camera. I mean, it's a shortcoming, of course, but they probably did it because it would make it not necessary for a lot of people to buy a more expensive camera like the A7S III. But it's there, and because there is that crop, I'm only going to use 60p in sparse circumstances where I want to make sure I have the ability to slow down some footage in post-production. Now, the third setting that I always set is the copyright data that I want written to my image. I've found my images in use across the web, including family photos that I've captured, and I've had to request takedowns. Now, even with the copyright data, it doesn't necessarily mean that people aren't going to listen, and if they find one of your photos and they decide to use it, they could still use it, but at least you had that copyright data written to the file, and there's a chance that unless they stripped out that copyright data on their own, that it's still in there, and you can prove ownership very easily with the copyright data that's written to the file. So under shooting, go to File and then over to Copyright Info. Turn on copyright info, so make sure that's turned on. You'll want to set the photographer name, which I just put in my name, and it makes it really easy because you can use the touchscreen to enter in that information. And then I'll set the copyright as all rights reserved, which means you don't have any rights to use this image for anything. And so that tells people that this image is not available for use. And then I can choose the option to display copyright info so I can make sure that everything reads correctly. As I said, this is going to make sure that copyright data is written to each and every file that you capture so that you can protect yourself against having your images used elsewhere. Now, I shoot hybrid with my cameras. I shoot a lot of photos and I shoot a lot of video. And since Sony has released their S-Cinetone picture profile, I've fallen in love with it. I think it's a great picture profile for shooting. It gives you great dynamic range, and it's a very editable, color correctable picture profile and is available on the A7 IV. So to get to that, you're going to go under the exposure color and then color tone menu and then over to picture profile, and then choose PP for picture profile 11. Now, none of these names are very descriptive. You wonder if any of them mean anything, but if you hit the arrow and go over, you can see under gamma and color mode that it does in fact say S-Cinetone, and other picture profiles will say other things, like this is HLG2, obviously, and all of the other picture profiles have their own names when you go under them. So PP11 is really just a numbering system. This is a numbering system for the picture profiles, but you can verify which ones you have by going over and seeing that the name here, in fact, is S-Cinetone. And so S-Cinetone is just, I find it much better and more workable than the standard picture profile that the camera is going to capture. I take everything that I shoot and I edit it in Final Cut Pro photo. And when I add a LUT over the top and do a little bit of color correction, I like working with that S-Cinetone image much better than a standard image. And unless I'm working on something really in-depth where I have a lot of control over my environment, I sometimes will go and shoot in an S-Log profile, but I do prefer S-Cinetone for everyday shooting. It's just a better picture profile, and it's really easy to work with. The fifth setting that I change has to do with the focus area that the camera is going to use when taking photos or shooting video. By default, your camera is going to use pretty much the entire area. It's really kind of hard to show that with the camera pointing at the table, but when you're utilizing focus, you're pressing down the shutter button to try and achieve focus. The camera is looking through pretty much the entire sensor and trying to decide what it should focus on. It's very hard to force the camera to choose. Of course, you can use tap, and you can tap on the screen and it will use tracking focus. It will override and use tracking focus, but I prefer to take over that job and just make it much easier on myself and the camera by not allowing it to just look at the entire scene. I want to tell the camera exactly where to go. So when I'm taking a picture of a person or an object or something like that, it makes sure that it is putting the focus point in the right area. Now, of course, the cameras have gotten much better with eye detect autofocus and the fact that it sees an eye and it's going to choose an eye because it's going to prioritize that. But in instances where that's not happening, or it's prioritizing the wrong eye, or it's prioritizing the wrong person's eye because you have multiple people in the shot, I don't want to waste time. Most of the time when I'm taking those images, it's either at a wedding or at a conference or of my children, and all of these moments happen so fast that they're non-repeatable, and if I get an image that's out of focus or even slightly out of focus, it's a huge frustration to me. So to override that, go into the menu, go to focus area, and then focus area. And instead of wide, toggle down to spot. And you can see there's small, medium, and large spot here. And I can toggle through the different sizes. I usually choose medium. And then you'll see I have this little box that's here. And I can move this box all around the screen and put that focus point wherever I want. That means, this box means that the camera is now only going to look to that box, and it's going to choose autofocus based on what is in that box. That's going to limit the amount of possibilities that the camera chooses something else in the scene to focus on and misses my intended focus point. I love this, and I utilize this to make the camera much smarter and much faster when I'm out shooting. Now, I also shoot with the Sony A1, and that camera is very fast and very intelligent. And this camera, of course, with basically very similar internals to the A1, is very fast and very intelligent as well. But when you're out there shooting, you do not want to miss an opportunity, and I have not yet found a reason to use anything other than this spot focus area and move the spot focus area around myself, or simply tap on an area of the screen which will override this spot focus area, and it will choose the tracking, and it will actually follow the subject that you tapped on. So you have kind of the best of both worlds at the same time with this camera when you have it set up this way. Now, there's two other ways to get to this setting. Of course, you can hit the function button and choose focus area and go straight there. And then the custom button here on the front of the camera, right next to the record button, the C2 button, also takes you there as well. Now, in my Ditch Auto course, I talk about ISO a lot and how I utilize that for gaining exposure. Now, on all the Sony cameras that have this dial on the back, you have to press to the right before you can get to the ISO. And to me, I want to save time. I just want to be able to rotate and adjust the ISO without having to press to the side, because when I'm shooting, my thumb is resting right around this dial area, and I just want to be able to rotate through and adjust my ISO so that I can be fast in adjusting and not have to press buttons or, start to rotate it. Oh, I forgot to press the button, and it's time saving to just go ahead and modify that setting. So to change that, go to the setup menu, go down to dial customize, go over to customize key dial set, and you can see it takes us right to that menu. If I press over to the side and then go down to number 4, by default that's blank. There's nothing set there. But if I press on that, I can then go over to my menu here and set it to all of these different things. By default, it's set to not set. So I'm going to go over to exposure and then go down to ISO and set it as ISO. And now when I rotate the control wheel left or right, I can increase or decrease the ISO easily. Now, one of the best settings that Sony finally brought to their cameras, they brought it to the A1 and the A7S III, and now with the A7 IV, the ability to maintain your settings when you switch between photo and video mode is an option, and you set that here under Setup, Option Customize, and then go to a different set for still MV, which is obscure, but it is what it is. And under these checkboxes, you want to go ahead and check all of these. And so what this is going to do is it's going to save settings that you have when you're in photo mode. So for example, if I have my settings here set for photo mode, and then I switch to video mode, which I'm still getting used to because of this little rocker switch here, you can see that it switched settings and now I'm in video mode. And so I might be at 1/60th and maybe f4 and 1600 ISO, and then when I switch back, it switches those settings back to where they were for photo, which is fantastic. This is super time saving for hybrid shooters who utilize settings specifically for photography and for video, which the settings are different. And I'll talk about this in my Ditch Auto course as we learn more about how to use this camera in manual mode. We'll be talking about both photography and video manual settings for this camera. So you'll definitely want to make sure to check out that course. So if you're wanting to learn more about this camera, you're definitely going to want to take a look at my Getting Started course. We'll be looking at all of the different settings and options all over the camera, how to customize it more deeply, and how to get out shooting amazing images and video right away without making any mistakes trying to figure out a new piece of equipment. So make sure to check out that course. The link is down in the description below. Well, that's going to do it for this video. Thanks so much. I hope that you found a few settings that were useful, and even just talking cameras and discussing our equipment helps us learn and better understand this new technology that we have in our hands to go out and capture great images and great video. So if you found this video useful, a thumbs up would be greatly appreciated. Subscribing to the channel would be awesome, and turn on notifications so that you can be notified when I put out new videos. These things also help the discoverability of this channel for other people, you know, algorithm stuff. So I really appreciate you doing those things for me, and I hope to see you back here soon in another video. Take care.